So today we'll be talking about Chapter 34, Section 3. And the title of this is Technology in Our Modern Life. Technology has changed the way we live. It's changed the way we communicate. It's changed the way that we move around. Advances in technology have arguably increased the pace of our lives, but they have also provided for many of our comforts and conveniences. And I've got a clip here to illustrate.
There has never been a bigger force for change than technology. It changes absolutely everything about the way we live, the way we get around, the way we eat, even the way we talk to each other.
So like the clip suggested, much of the information that I'm going to teach you today is already outdated. And even if I were to update it to the current year, it would be outdated within a couple years. But a few basic terms that will hopefully be universal and helpful in understanding the technology of our world. The information superhighway is a global network of communication devices. As you saw in the clip, the capability to network devices is growing exponentially, and the amount of devices connected to this network is growing exponentially. The international computer network that we use daily, obviously, is called the Internet. And this allows for the uploading of text, sound, video, content, data onto the World Wide Web. Now, the Internet is the network itself. The global communications network is called the information superhighway, and then the World Wide Web is how you interface with that network. So the network itself is contained on billions of devices around the world. These devices connect to the network and become a part of the content which is there simply by virtue of getting online. And so the data on the Internet is hosted on billions of devices around the world. Now, by the year 2000, 97 million Americans were using the Internet daily. In today's world, almost all Americans use the Internet daily. So as you can see, in a 16-year period, the amount of people using the Internet on a daily basis has more than tripled. Users can access media through a multitude of mediums. In fact, one aspect of this PowerPoint that is dated is now you can access the Internet or the World Wide Web through devices the size of the palm of your hand. And perhaps in 10 years, these devices will be implanted into your bodies. In fact, the technology already exists, and some people are already connecting to the Internet through implants that have been surgically put into their bodies. So the capabilities are limitless. And you are now able to work and live and socialize and play and conduct business entirely through the web. You could have an active social life and never leave your house. You could have a lucrative business from anywhere in the world while you travel. Conduct your business on a bus or a train or a plane or in your car. Someday, very soon, cars will be driving themselves, allowing you to conduct business as you commute. So this idea of telecommuting was a novelty when I was your age. Yet now, it's becoming increasingly practical. So at the rate that technology is growing, and with the slow pace that our government moves, our government's ability to legislate and regulate the rapid growth of technology is rather difficult. For example, one of the questions that is already being asked is, whose fault is it if a self-driving car encounters a wreck? In fact, of all the beta testing they've done with self-driving cars, almost all of the accidents involving a self-driving vehicle have been the result of human error from another driver. So at this time, as the result of the beta testing, computers are much better drivers than we are. Big surprise. Yet the Federal Communications Commission, the group that was created to monitor the radio airways, is also the federal group that monitors the Internet traffic. The Telecommunications Act of 1996 allows communication companies to start up or to buy related ones. The idea was that it would increase competition, but it also permitted major media mergers. I'm sure you've heard of many of these major media conglomerates such as Clear Channel or Comcast. These are media companies that own a number of online publications, syndications, and programs. In fact, consumer and civil rights activists have criticized provisions of this bill, arguing that the Telecommunications Act of 1996 is going to allow large corporations to control the flow of information. And critics of this bill say this has now become a reality, is that much of the information that you access online is either inaccurate, produced by normal people, or it is biased when produced professionally through these conglomerates. In fact, the Supreme Court struck down parts of the act because of these reasons. Now, again, some of the information here is dated. Virtual landscapes. These were a relatively new phenomenon in the early 2000s. Yet today, there are online worlds and communities that you may interact with and you may spend your free time in. You may conduct business in, you may hold meetings in. I've seen teachers who have meetings in World of Warcraft. They say, okay, students, connect, go to this location in this virtual world, and that's where we'll have class. I've seen it. And as you know, World of Warcraft is one of the more popular of these virtual landscapes, but it is certainly not the only one. These virtual landscapes exist in the business world. I've held virtual meetings with sales representatives where we can connect our devices. I can see what's on that individual's screen. He can show me what in real time I need to look at. I've demoed software this way. I've held business meetings this way with people around the world. You can connect simultaneously through the World Wide Web. Virtual reality is becoming more and more feasible. It is becoming more appealing. In fact, there are new consumer devices being released this year that will make virtual reality much more attractive. Now, as computer capabilities increase, some point to the possibility of what is called the singularity. That we may reach a point in our lifetimes where the intelligence of robots exceed that of human beings. We are not there yet, and no one has yet given us a date when that may happen. And so the possibility is there. But right now, we have high-capacity chips which can simulate brain function. We have humanized robots that can interact, but not yet replicate human behavior. Meaning, if you watch a science fiction movie was created in the early 1980s called Blade Runner, about the possibility of singularity someday in the future. In fact, it was one of Harrison Ford's first movies. It was J.J. Abrams' breakout film, so if you're a fan of him, it's a good one to watch. And it was, the plot of the movie involved replicants. These were robots with artificial intelligence that were so well designed they could pass for a human being. And then Harrison Ford played a special role. He had the ability to figure out which people were robots and which people were humans. There was a test that he could administer called the Turing test, named after the person who developed the first computer. Again, we're not that advanced yet. However, the technology is growing. Artificial intelligence is quite phenomenal at this point. In regards to space exploration, again, let me update the information. We currently have a timeline for colonizing the planet of Mars. Within our lifetimes, this may very well happen. At the time of the publication of this, Mars missions were transmitting live pictures online. Today, if you want to see what Mars looks like, Google it. If you want to see video, Google it. Great. We have access to information giving us data from galaxies away. The International Space Station is quite a remarkable thing. It is the largest orbiting structure that has yet been conceived or developed. It is a collaboration among countries. It is considered diplomatically international waters, meaning that no one country owns this station. And it has been used for research peacefully since it was developed. The Hubble Space Telescope is also quite phenomenal. Again, if you want to see what these places look like, you can simply Google them and access information eons away at the push of a button. You can look at images that have been taken by our most advanced telescopes on devices the size of the palm of your hand. It's remarkable what technology has enabled us to do.
It is in 1952 that the United States detonates the first hydrogen bomb.
Edward Teller, one of the physicists on the Manhattan Project, devoted himself to trying to develop what came to be called the hydrogen bomb, where a fusion reaction would be sparked by a fission reaction coming first. And the United States and the Soviet Union both were trying to develop hydrogen weapons throughout the early 1950s.
The development of hydrogen weapons sparks yet another race between the two countries. The race to develop unmanned rockets and long-range missiles capable of delivering weapons to distant targets. Both the American and Soviet space programs grow out of this contest. But in this arena, the Soviets score first, placing the satellite Sputnik in orbit in 1957.
When the Russians launched their satellite and the United States is left out in the cold, it's embarrassing. There's a sense of, why don't we have more scientific advancement? What's going on in the schools? And so there's an extraordinary push, including federal dollars, into the school system to improve particularly the sciences and math. And interestingly enough, women benefit from this because there's a sense that we have to take advantage of all of our citizens. And so young girls are given, I think, a little bit more attention than they might have.
Through acts like the National Defense Education Act, the professions really developed. As more and more PhDs were turned out, these professionals began to develop agendas for social reform, for improving health in the area of public health, in traffic safety for engineers, all of which required some kind of coordinating mechanism, often at the national level. So they went to the federal government for a number of things. They went for money, as we're all familiar with, but they also needed kind of some administrative mechanism to make the programs that they advocated for solving these problems work. Experts did something else that we often forget about. Experts discovered problems. Being able to see what is not visible to the naked eye. And so with the discovery of problems comes more jammed policy agendas.
One of the most striking characteristics of the 1950s is the predominance of the middle class. They are people of plenty, as one author calls them, a consumer culture. And their numbers include people whose families had been on the fringes of poverty not too many years earlier.
The 1950s is a very prosperous period. Not all Americans share equally in that prosperity, but nonetheless the standard of living is high. People have a lot of consumer goodies that they're very eager to buy.
Housing was transformed from city architecture and city housing to a greatly expanded suburban world. Now, suburbs had always existed, but they explode in the 1950s, and they continue to explode. That's one part of the consumer revolution. The second part is, of course, automobiles. And automobiles are produced in massive numbers, and they have the most amazing and fanciful designs. Things which are meant to look aerodynamic, which of course aren't, but they look like it. They resemble airplanes, they resemble jets. To me, they look like giant fish very often. It's quite amazing. And I think television was the third one, which brought the house and the car and the road into people's consciousness in ways that hadn't been before, and which brought advertising into people's lives in a new kind of way. So those three things really, I think, are the engines of the consumer revolution.
Temporary fads and crazes also sweep the nation. Some latch on and become permanent parts of the culture.
It was right after World War II that pizza parlors began to burgeon in America. Soldiers who had been in Italy brought back this new delicacy, which became a total staple. You can't imagine America without pizza, but I lived in America without pizza.
In the year 2000, the human genome was almost completely sequenced. In fact, we've reached a point where we can determine genetic deficiencies causing lifelong conditions. We can eliminate the potential for parents to pass on these genetic deficiencies to their children. We are in that brave new world that Mr. Huxley wrote about. DNA evidence can be used to confirm the guilt of individuals who have committed crimes or prove the innocence of defendants. Through looking at the smallest details of biological evidence, we can determine who was in a room at the time a crime was being committed. Forensics can determine from the tiniest bits of skin fragments, which we all leave behind. It's gross to think about, but there are bits of you that you will leave in this room today that a well-trained person can determine who was in this room based on those small pieces of you that you leave behind. It's also why you should wash your clothes every day and your bed sheets as often as you can, because anywhere that you reside for a period of time, pieces of you will be left behind. Cloning and gene therapy are potential uses of our knowledge of the human genome. These have sparked moral and ethical debates. Is it right to clone a human being? Is it right to clone simply pieces of a human? It's a legitimate ethical question. Genetic engineering means that we have the capability to artificially change an organism's cells. Of course, the movie Jurassic World was created exploring the potential ethical dilemmas in this theory. Genetically altered food is already a reality. In fact, that's what GMO in food stands for, is that it's been genetically modified. Foods can be genetically modified to resist pests naturally. Imagine a food that pests don't want to eat. Wow. Oh, don't imagine it. That's what you'll be having for lunch. Genetically modified food. It remains a controversial issue, and it's led to the rise of the organic farming movement. Organic farmers choose not to include genetically modified seeds in their farms. You can buy organic if you choose to. Some claim there are unintended side effects that go with genetically modified foods, but you're eating them. When you go to Bojangles, that chicken, it tastes so good, so juicy. That chicken has been injected with chemicals to allow it to grow more quickly, to develop more meat more quickly. Medical progress. Survival rates of cancer as well as HIV, have increased due to technology. Improved technologies have allowed for improved diagnoses. Where will medical technology lead us in our lifetimes? I have no idea. What will this mean for our country's population? What will this mean for the growing gap between the rich and the poor? We are already at a point where the wealthy live longer than the poor, partially because of access to health care. If we reach a point where organs can be grown and replaced, at what point will this stop? Now, currently, those who understand these sciences believe that we will possess the capability to replace organs within our lifetimes and to grow them genetically in labs. But yet, at this point, we do not possess the understanding to repair significantly or replace the brain. Alzheimer's will get us all in the end. Replace 10 hearts, but eventually your brain will begin to deteriorate. Environmental measures. Scientists have been seeking ways to reduce our dependence on polluting fossil fuels, and this technology is growing rapidly. In fact, the technology exists for us to pave our roadways with solar cells, which would generate enough power to pay for themselves. The technology exists, in fact, was just recently developed to make homes self-sustaining through energy production. We can put solar panels on our roof that are growing far more cheaper every day, far more affordable. And as we've learned with the economic balance of progress, when those solar panels become cheap enough that they pay for themselves, at that point, they will be widely implemented. And entrepreneurs are working towards that goal. Whoever figures it out will never have to work again. If you can make solar panels cheap enough for the average American to afford them, congratulations, you've won the lottery. And so people are working towards that goal. The Tesla company has already developed a battery capable of storing the day's solar collection for long periods of time. You see, that technology was not there until this year. And because of that, it wasn't feasible to power your home with solar. Now it is. Thanks to these technologies, the public has reduced consumption of raw materials through recycling. In fact, recycled plastics have reduced our consumption of oil. Recycled papers have reduced our consumption of timber. And recycling has allowed us to use our resources in a more sustainable way.
During the post-war years, a relatively small number of corporations gained control of a huge share of the nation's economic activity. Understandably, these industrial giants are reluctant to allow strikes to interfere with their operations. As an alternative, they negotiate what comes to be called the post-war contract, an agreement that gives unionized workers generous wage increases in return for abandoning any attempt to gain control over the workplace.
What they also tried to do in the 50s is to start to build benefit packages. Workers didn't get health insurance. They didn't get it until unions got it for them. They didn't get paid vacations until the unions got it for them. That's no small thing. So there was some sense that you had to hold back on these broader goals.
But even as the labor movement is winning impressive successes for its members, its share of the labor force begins to decline.
Two big things happened to the labor movement. One is the AFL and CIO come together in 1955. And for the CIO people who created those big industrial unions with these great visions in the 1930s, that's not a happy day. Most of them really think of it AFL-CIO merger is giving in to the more conservative wing of the movement. The other big thing that happens is that it's in the late 50s that unions get tarnished with the whole kind of image of corruption, and the critical figure in the story is young Robert Kennedy, who launches his crusade against Jimmy Hoffa, the president of the Teamsters Union, and portrays the Teamsters as what they were, an incredibly corrupt organization. The problem is that most Americans, they don't make distinctions between the Teamsters on the one hand and the steel workers on the other. They're union members. So when I was writing a book on the United Automobile Workers, which is one of the squeaky clean unions in the country, people would say, isn't that dangerous? As if somehow UAW thugs were going to come beat me up for writing a book. Because everyone figured corruption and unions went together. The forward movement of unions stalled. In fact, the percentage of workers in unions starts to decline in the mid-1950s, and it never stops.
The post-war years also see remarkable advances in science and technology. Medical breakthroughs with the development of antibiotics like penicillin and vaccines to suppress influenza and polio. Some of the innovations are an outgrowth of military research.
In the wake of World War II, the U.S. government becomes involved in funneling enormous amounts of money into the sciences, medicine, engineering, technology, initially to create the weapons systems and other related military systems that are a crucial part of Cold War strategy.
Before World War II, many professional scientists, in particular, were very wary of working for the federal government. They associated that with politics, they associated that with political patronage, they associated it with being told what to do. Starting with the Manhattan Project to develop the bomb, but also experience in working on radar, experience in working on chemical weapons, experience in working with DDT. A whole range of scientists began to realize that, first off, we can't build our labs, we can't build our telescopes, we can't do our big science without federal dollars. And second off, this nation feels strongly enough about its experts that the federal government's going to kind of let us do our own thing. They're not going to attach a lot of strings to our research agenda.
But the government also recognizes that investment in research and development will spin off activities and know-how that will benefit the private sector. The establishment of a more coherent national telephone network and the creation of a television network system are all the result of government expenditures that are initially inspired by these military concerns.